Hello and welcome back to the Wandering Cantos. Today we're going to be talking about the Chainsaw Man movie. I'm going to try to do what I did last week where I don't spend an hour and a half on each topic. So I'm going to try to keep this one short. That being said, I wanted to give a quick spoiler warning. I'm mostly going to be talking about the movie, but there will be some spoilers for the first season of the anime. I have not read the manga, so there won't be any manga spoilers in this, but I do ask that if you leave a comment, you try not to spoil anything from the manga or what comes basically after this movie, since I'm actually really enjoying participating in this sort of series. So, that being said, I think we can jump right into it. All right, so, if I were to try to review an animated movie like this, I was thinking it could be sort of helpful to have basically a sort of scorecard. So as for the animation, this movie gets full marks. It's genuinely one of the best animated movies I've seen, especially when it comes to the fighting choreography. It was sort of interesting because I felt like the art style in this movie was a bit different than the actual anime series, like TV show. I felt like some of the actual characters looked a bit more drawn, if that makes sense. It almost looked like not quite pencil drawings, but there was a certain quality to them where they stood out from the background backdrop, which wasn't necessarily bad. I felt it looked a bit distracting in like a few scenes early on in the movie, but again, the actual animation and movement and artistry of the actual like fight scenes in the second half of the movie were really phenomenal. Again, it's some of the best fight scene choreography, etc., that I've seen in a movie, especially because there were just some moments that were so artistically just interesting. So, for example, the Typhoon Devil, after they're defeated, the streets flood with blood, and which was just like a really cool dramatic, it kind of almost felt like what you would imagine a fight between like Greek gods would look like. There was also a really cool moment where, and unfortunately, I feel like the fight scenes are so, like almost overstimulating with there's so much going on because he's literally fighting a bomb devil. There's explosions like every 5 seconds, but there's this scene where it shows a close-up of Denji's face as he's in his sort of like chainsaw hybrid, and there's all of this splashes of color. It almost looks like paint. There's like greens and reds and stuff, and I believe they keep moving even though he's in a still frame, but it creates this really cool visual effect. And in general, there's just a ton of cool references to other movies, and there's even like a scene of him riding a horse, which is like a reference to like one of the first animated like movie things of all time. Just really, really interesting and just totally visually stunning. As for the story, I'd also give this one a really high score. I felt like, especially as a contained story, there sort of is an ongoing debate as to whether you need to know anything about Chainsaw Man before you go into this movie or not. I definitely think you'll have a much richer experience going into it if you are familiar, just because you'll sort of understand some of the characters' sort of motivations and odd choices at times. But that being said, as a self-contained story with standard beginning, middle, and end, it was a really phenomenal story, and something I wasn't expecting going into it. As I said earlier, I haven't read the manga for this, so I had no idea what to expect from this movie. But I really enjoyed basically seeing this sort of arc of Reze and Denji. And, really the story, on the one hand, the story is about Denji meeting another girl who's sort of outside of the organization he's a part of, and, sort of grappling with also the emotions of sort of still socializing in the world since he had such an unorthodox childhood. But that being said, I really also feel like the movie's more about Reze, and you're getting to actually see her get a glimpse into a normal life through Denji and whatnot. So Very, very interesting. And as I sort of got into there, since story and character are so intertwined, it gets really good scores there. Soundtrack was phenomenal, and some of the songs are already seeming to become trending songs on TikTok and whatnot because they're really iconic and emotional, and they have cool motifs and everything you want from a soundtrack. I saw the English dub only because basically my schedule wouldn't allow me to have the time to see the original sub version. I really wish I could have seen the sub, and I'm hoping if the movie is in theaters long enough, I'll eventually have time to see the sub, since that's usually my preferred way of consuming things like this. But that being said, I thought the dub was really well done. I feel like English voice acting dubs have gotten a lot better. Not even in the most recent years, even as far as 10 years back. Originally, it was sort of a running meme that, the dub is usually terrible, but the English voice actors have been doing really, really good work with video games and anime like this. So, I thought, especially Reze's voice acting was really well done in this. So, give high scores to all of those. If I were to try to talk about some of the cons with this, I feel like, and this is going to be controversial because I know a lot of people actually like this about the series, but I think sometimes it's like sort of crude humor, slash well, I guess crude humor is really the best way to describe it. I feel like sometimes that gets in the show's way. Because on the one hand, humor makes people laugh, and usually people tend to like things when they laugh, etc. But I feel like there's this debate right now with whether or not this is sort of a, silly, superficial show that just has not safe for work content, etc., or if it's actually a deep intellectual show that has to this having a conversation about trauma and personal interactions and relationships and all of that stuff. And I lean towards it's definitely trying to have a much more intellectual conversation, but as a result, that's why I feel like sometimes the crude humor sort of gets in its own way. And often they'll have a moment with kind of a dumb joke, and it almost sort of cheapens sometimes some of the more emotional blows. For example, they knew in the final fight and the moment with Reze, when Denji and Reze fight and then they sink into the ocean, and then also afterwards when they're talking on the beach and he's basically saying, well, we can still run away together. They knew in that moment not to include crude humor. When she's walking away and Denji can't move, he says, meet me at the cafe, promise me you'll be there, I'll be there waiting for you. And he's able to just say something that's serious and, emotional, and vulnerable. But there's a lot of other moments in the movie, but also especially in the show, where it feels like they feel the need to make a crude humor joke, which would cheapen it, which would be just as cheap if Reze was walking away, Denji said something just inappropriate and sexual about her, that would have cheapened the moment of her walking away on the beach. And they're even able to still have humor in that moment because basically I think his neck is broken, so he can't move and he needs Beam to help him. So they're able to have their humor, but it's not the type of humor that sort of just makes you cringe. Similarly, I guess one of the moments from the movie would be, there's a scene where Denji is struggling with, sort of articulating his emotions with his sort of interest in Makima and Reze, where he he doesn't know which one to basically be solely interested in, because he has interest in one and thought that one was the only girl for him, and now he's met this other person who's expressing a ton of interest in him and seems nice and kind, and so as a result, he's just struggling with it because of his childhood, he kind of didn't socialize much and whatnot. So he's sort of, a fish out of water with even just normal social interaction. But he makes a comment about how he has to decide between two boobs or something like that, and it just felt like it just ended this kind of interesting moment on sort of a stupid, again, crude joke. And I feel like that's why there's this debate right now about whether or not it's again, just sort of a stupid superficial show, or if it's actually deep and intellectual. So I just lean in the camp where I feel like the crude humor just sort of gets in its way. I feel like, to mention one thing from the show, there's a character who, this is going to be really gross if you're not familiar with the show, so this is your warning to skip ahead if you're squeamish at all. But basically there's a scene where a character gets really drunk and vomits, and it gets on another character, is what I'll say is the sort of nice way. People who've seen the show know what I'm talking about. And then the next episode, that character dies, and it just feels weird because as soon as the character's dead, they try to really crank up the sad, meter, and as storytellers, they want you to feel devastated that they're gone, and they do a really sad outro, and they do another outro, and then we sort of have to see different characters sort of grappling with it. And it sort of just feels weird that they ended one of the last scenes we see with them as one of the most repulsive things I've ever seen in a TV show. And also, there's sort of some uncomfortable conversation about, an age gap between this character and Denji. And also, since that character seems to be interested in Aki, it's sort of weird that they portray her last moments as being with Denji as sort of like a fling. Obviously, nothing ends up happening between them because Denji turns this character down, but it basically just creates this weird dynamic where it sort of taints your ability to engage with it fully, because you've just seen, again, one of the grossest scenes ever, and you sort of have to bleach your eyes after that. But that's all I'll say about that. There's sort of just one more final big conversation topic I want to talk about, which is something I think a lot of people are sort of getting wrong about the movie that I've been seeing in some of the internet discourse. All right, so as you can see, what I've written on the chalkboard, I want to discuss what people get wrong about Reze and the movie in general. So, before I get into that fully, I think it's important to, do a quick summary of what goes on so you'll get what I'm talking about. So, from Denji's perspective, basically, Denji meets where he has his normal life. Then he meets Reze, and she works at a cafe, and she invites him to come over there, and she immediately shows interest in him, and then they begin to sort of have a flirty relationship. It's not quite dating, it's quite not dating. And then she invites him to go to a school because she discovers he's never gone to school, and so they go to explore a school after hours, and they skinny dip in a pool. And since Denji has sort of a weird relationship with his own sexuality because he had no socialization as a kid and everything, and he had such a brutal childhood of having to work to pay off this debt, in a way he's almost reduced to sort of bare impulses and needs. He wants food, and he wants physical intimacy but not romantic intimacy. But he actually kind of does want the romantic stuff, but he doesn't fully understand it. So he's going off of sort of his impulses. So this is sort of a big moment for him because, a girl who seems to be normal seems to just genuinely be wanting to share this moment with him. And then, they continue to see each other, and they go to a festival, but then this is where she betrays him, and, she reveals that she's actually, Bomb, and she just wants to steal his heart, literally, because that's what gives him his powers and whatnot. And so they fight across the whole city, and then, one of the more climactic moments is him and her are fighting, and he wraps his chains around her and throws both of them into the ocean since her bombs won't work underwater. And then his bombs won't work under the water, and then it seems like they're gonna die, but then they're saved. They wash up on, the beach with Beam, who seems to be the one who saved them. And then he says we can still run away together, and he asks her to meet him at the cafe that they used to meet at. She says no and walks away, but then it's sort of the real climax. We see that she stays at the train, doesn't get on it, and then she tries to run towards the cafe and meet up with him, but she's killed before she can, basically by I believe her name's Makima, and basically the organization that Denji's a part of, but Denji doesn't know this. So Denji thinks he's been stood up, and she potentially thinks that Denji set her up for an attack. And then it sort of ends with, Denji basically being alone, and then power comes in, and it sort of just ends on a goofy moment between them. So a lot of people then sort of play up this relationship between them, and they talk a lot about the swimming scene at the school in the pool, and then the scene of her running to the cafe. But what I think a lot of people get wrong about this is, they sort of make it sad, and they say, oh, if only she had made it to the cafe and Denji turned around and, he would be able to see her getting attacked and he could save her and things like that. However, the thing that no one seems to really be talking about is the Reze that we see over here during all of these date scenes is drastically different from the Reze we see at the end. Because as Reze reveals, this was all an act while she was trying to get his heart and basically manipulate him, get him to lower his guard. She says she taught herself how to blush. She's never been to school before, but she plays up, oh, I'm doing my homework at the cafe. Oh, let me teach you things. But then whenever she tries to teach him something, it's extremely basic, like 1 + 1 = 2. And, she just kind of writes crude words that even he admits he knows how to read. And so all of this is fake. She doesn't actually skinny dip and swim in the pool with Denji at that moment because 100% she just likes Denji. It's basically implied that through the process of doing this sort of fake life stuff, she might have accidentally caught feelings for him, but she certainly wasn't intending to. And also, there's sort of this interesting thing where they both sort of realize they have similar pasts in that they both weren't able to go to school because it's revealed that she was basically stuck in this sort of like lab, horrible torture sort of neglect system for the Soviets as they were trying to, create like the perfect weapon and whatnot. So she also had a super messed up childhood. But the Reze here that's skinny dipping and swimming and flirting with Denji, that Denji likes so much, is not the girl who was experimented on by the Soviets and didn't have a childhood. So he even says that he can't help himself whenever a girl is nice to him. He can't help but, basically get feelings for them. But the girl who's being nice to him, who's doing all this, who's flirting, who's laughing at every joke, the girl that Denji likes so much, that isn't Reze. The only time we really get to see potentially the real Reze isn't even also when she's in bomb mode and she's fighting in the city, because that's sort of the Soviets version of Reze. We really only maybe get to truly see her when she's on the beach with Denji at the end and also at the train station. And so the thing that I would sort of bring up is that even though she's running back to Denji and may potentially have feelings for him, she is going to be drastically different on a personality level than the Reze that Denji buys all these flowers for. So even if she had made it to the cafe, and wasn't attacked or anything, I do wonder, would things have even worked out in the end between them? Because ultimately it feels like what Denji wants is the girl who laughs at his jokes and is flirty and will show him around schools and skinny dip with him and all of that. But if Reze had survived and was able to escape from the Soviets and escape from the gun devil and, you know, all these people she has contracts with and who she's working for, and if they were to able to run away to the countryside as country mice and go into hiding, she's going to have so much like trauma that she's going to have to unpack that, again, like thinking of sort of the scene we see of her where she's, killing a man on the roof of the school, she has this, you know, sort of terrifying but also heartbreaking look on her face where her eyes twitching and everything, because she is this sort of like Soviet agent and then also, you know, an agent of gun. But then she goes down back to Denji and all of that, you know, emotion is wiped from her face and she goes back to being all fakesy and cute and silly and goofy. And I feel like, so if they ran away and she's able to totally take off her mask and she's not having to do all of this pretend for Denji in order to lower his guard, would Denji even like the real girl? Because the real girl is, again, she's going to be much more quiet, more reserved. She's going to be sort of brooding on her own trauma. She's going to be scared of the people who are coming after her, anxious, all of these emotions that she was never able to show in front of him before. And he really only likes the one that basically makes him feel like he's on top of the world, that he's the funniest guy ever, and that, oh, she wants to swim naked with him, all of those things. So I haven't seen a lot of discourse sort of like addressing this, so I just wanted to take a moment to talk about that. But with that said, that sort of, you know, covers all of my main thoughts with this movie. So I'm going to wrap that up here. I hope you guys enjoyed this. As always, I hope you guys are sort of enjoying these new reviews I've been doing. You know, it's a bit of a change in content from the rest of the stuff in the channel, but I also am hoping that you find this to be informative from sort of a writer's perspective and sort of, you know, focusing on the storytelling and craft and whatnot. But with that said, I'm going to wrap this up and I will see you in the next one. Bye.